Good afternoon and welcome to the officials from the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, Ministry of Trade and Industry, and the Office of the Prime Minister. My name is Bridget Annie Z. George and I'm the Chairman of the PAAC Committee of the Parliament. The Committee on Public Administration and Appropriations, PAAC, has the mandate to consider and report to the House on A, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies to ensure that expenditure is embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval. B, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies as it occurs and keeps Parliament informed of how the budget allocation is being implemented. And C, the administration of government agencies to determine hindrances to their efficiency and to make recommendations to the government for improvement of public administration. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct an inquiry into food security in Trinidad and Tobago in alignment with Sustainable Development Goal 2, Zero Hunger. The committee's role is to determine whether the stakeholders present will A, ensure a constant supply of food of a nutritional value for the population at all times, B, alleviate this country's food security concerns and sustain long-term local agricultural productivity levels, C, identify mechanisms needed to enhance and improve local agricultural investment, as well as improve regional and international agricultural cooperation, and D, make recommendations for improvement of this country's food security. The meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic via email parl101@ttparliament.org, facebook.com ttparliament, and Twitter @ttparliament. At this time, I would invite members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting from my furthest right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lisa Morris Julian, member.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members, and officials. Lawrence Hislop, member.
Good afternoon, Lakram Bodo, Vice Chairman. Welcome all.
Good afternoon, Amrita Devanarayan, member.
Thank you very much, members. And I will now invite the representatives from the various ministries to introduce themselves, starting with the Ministry of Planning and Development.
So, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee, and members of the viewing public. I'm Carleen Roach, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Deborah Dipchan Singh, Ministry of Planning and Development, Acting Director of the Socioeconomic Policy Planning Division.
Good afternoon, Chair, everyone. I am Erica Fortune, Acting Director of the Project Planning and Reconstruction Division.
Thank you very much, and may I invite the representatives from the Ministry of Health next.
Good afternoon, Michael Reed, Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Good afternoon, all. I am Dr. Mark Dukaran, Acting Chief Public Health Inspector.
Thank you very much. We move on to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Wendy Guy Hernandez, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, everyone. Christine John Guy, Acting Director, Social Welfare, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Chair and members and colleagues. My name is Angelique Taylor, Senior Planning Officer for the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Sion Raymond, and I am the Director of the Social Investigations Division, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Thank you very much. And can we move on to the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries?
Chair, members of the committee, colleagues, good afternoon. I am Mrs. Neela Dwarka Ali, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Narissa Lucky. I am the Acting Director of Fisheries, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Nigel Grimes, Project Coordinator, Technical Advisor, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you very much. Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. I am Aileen Allen Ovid, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Candice Lackinsing, Director of Policy and Strategy at the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Neville Alexander, Acting Assistant Director of Trade.
And finally, the Office of the Prime Minister.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ian Rabdahin, Permanent Secretary, National AIDS Coordinating Committee, Office of the Prime Minister.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee and colleagues. My name is Vijay Gangapasad, Acting Permanent Secretary, Gender and Child Affairs Division.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Macandal Caesar. I am the Monitoring and Evaluation Coordinator, Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you all. And might I ask maybe if some of the representatives could shift their chairs a bit, because we're in a direct line and some of you really can't see. Thank you very much. Okay, so at this stage I will invite the permanent secretaries from each ministry to make a brief opening statement if they wish. So again, we could go in the same order and we'll start with the Ministry of Planning and Development.
So, thank you and good afternoon again, everyone. The Ministry of Planning and Development welcomes the opportunity to participate in this inquiry into food security in Trinidad and Tobago in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goal, Zero Hunger by 2030. The provision of access to adequate, nutritious, safe, and affordable food for all persons at this time is an imperative for the sustainable development of Trinidad and Tobago. Food security is a cross-cutting issue and is therefore embodied in the strategic objectives of our National Development Strategy 2016 to 2030, also known as Vision 2030. Also incorporated in the Vision 2030 are the roadmap and to recovery and the community recovery reports, which were produced by the multidisciplinary committees established by the Honorable Prime Minister with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. These committees were tasked with addressing and mitigating the hardships inflicted by COVID-19, restarting the economy and laying the foundation for sustained economic recovery. Now, both of these documents were accepted in 2021 as part of the government's medium-term policy strategy. The roadmap to recovery specifically speaks to bolstering food security by expanding the food supply and non-energy exports and reinventing agricultural systems and producing differently, among other things. Addressing food security requires a multi-pronged, whole-of-society approach, including short, medium, and longer-term strategies involving public and private sectors, civil society, the government's regional and international development partners, as well as the general population. Now, the 2023 to 2025 Public Sector Investment Program currently focuses on 9 development priorities, of which priority number 3 is ensuring food safety and security. In that regard, the Ministry of Planning and Development continues to ensure that projects and programs that are aligned to these areas receive priority funding under the PSIP, inclusive of those that would continue and contribute to increasing and promoting zero hunger and food security. A rough estimate indicates that approximately $100 million from the current PSIP has been allocated to projects that contribute to food security, including those to assist in minimizing the constraints facing the agriculture sector. From a climate change perspective, the Ministry, through the Environmental Policy Planning Division, is collaborating with our development partners and engaging in local, regional, and international endeavors to implement adaptation and mitigation measures to combat the negative impacts of climate change on Trinidad and Tobago as a small island developing state, including the negative impact of extreme events on food production. Now, we're in 2023, and we're midway through the implementation of the Vision 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Ministry, as a national focal point for the monitoring of the SDGs, is not currently in a position to report on the progress due to the absence of current baseline data and information. Fortunately, however, by June, July of this year, the results of the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, which is a mixed survey conducted in 2022 by the CSO in the latter half of last year, should become available. This survey focuses on women and children, including data and information on nutrition. Also, by August next year, the Ministry and other relevant stakeholders should have access to data and information from the 2023 Joint Household Budgetary Survey and the Survey of Living Conditions currently being conducted by the CSO. The survey started in February of this year and will be completed by February of 2024, with approximately 6 months for the production of the report. This joint survey will provide much needed data and information on incomes and expenditure, which will facilitate the establishment of a new poverty line and enable better monitoring of the progress of the implementation of the SDGs to 2030. In the very near future, all the relevant elements, including up-to-date data and information from the CSO surveys, inclusive mechanisms for consulting with all of our stakeholders, as well as robust systems for data collection, monitoring, and reporting, will be dovetailing as we seek to eliminate hunger by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam PS. And may I now invite the PS from the Ministry of Health to make a brief opening statement if he so wishes.
Good afternoon again, Chair and members. The Ministry of Health is committed to ensuring that Trinidad and Tobago has a healthy population. And to that end, the Ministry has several initiatives that would lend to the population of Trinidad and Tobago having nutritious food, information on nutritious foods, so that they can make the right choices to live a healthy life. The Ministry is happy to be able to participate in this meeting so that we can bring whatever information to the committee to move forward in achieving the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger. Thank you.
Thank you so much, PS. And might I invite now the PS of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Chairman, members of the committee, fellow colleagues from the other ministries, viewers, and listeners tuned in to the session, good afternoon. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services welcomes the opportunity to meet and discuss with the Public Administration and Appropriation Committee this important issue of food security in Trinidad and Tobago in alignment with Sustainable Development Goal 2, Zero Hunger. As a ministry, we are mandated with the responsibility for addressing the social challenges of poverty, social inequality, and social exclusion. As a result, particular emphasis is placed on developing and executing programs and services to protect and assist those who are classified as poor, vulnerable, and marginalized groups, such as persons with disabilities, the elderly, socially displaced persons, families, and persons living with HIV/AIDS, just to name a few. The matter of food security remains one of paramount importance to the ministry, which seeks to support our country in meeting its international obligations in keeping with Sustainable Development Goal 2, Zero Hunger. Moreover, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, in its efforts to support food resilience to the poor and vulnerable citizenry, is ever mindful of the prevailing socio-economic circumstances as well as the global impacts of climate change on food security. The ministry notes that food security is achieved when everyone has physical, social, and economic access at all times to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. In closing, the ministry looks forward to today's discourse and welcomes the opportunity to expound on some of our current intervention measures and those planned for the near future in treating with food security. We will continue to remain guided by the recommendations of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee as we seek to improve our programs and services. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam PS. And may I now invite the PS in the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Agriculture is indispensable to the social and economic development of Trinidad and Tobago and is therefore a major component of food security and economic viability. As enunciated in the government's roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago post-COVID-19 pandemic, a concentrated effort is now placed on boosting the food and nutrition security of the country through investment in agriculture, expanding the food supply, and in reinventing agricultural systems. Of the 4 pillars of food security, food availability, food access, food utilization, and food stability, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries has a primary role in ensuring food availability. Food availability implies increasing agricultural production, and this is currently being supported through actions including creating an enabling environment for production of key commodities, increased focus on youth in agriculture, access to technical and extension support, increased access to grants for agricultural development, and encouraging the adoption of technology and innovation to drive agricultural production. In this regard, the ministry continues, therefore, to strengthen its capacity to contribute to improved food security through initiatives such as the provision of high-quality planted material, training of farmers in good agricultural practices, enhanced agriculture infrastructure to support food production, enhancing biodiversity, and nationally, collaborative efforts with the development partners, including the FAO, which is the Food and Agricultural Organization, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture, ICA, and the Caribbean Agriculture Research and Development Institute, CARI, supports the achievement of SDG number 2. An integrated whole-of-government approach is therefore indispensable in working towards improving food and nutrition security in Trinidad and Tobago. The Ministry of Agriculture, therefore, thanks the committee for the opportunity to encourage the discussions as we work towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 2, Zero Hunger. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, PS. And may I now invite the PS from the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. It is a privilege to come before this Public Administration and Appropriations Committee this afternoon as we discuss this very important topic of food security in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly as it relates to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 2, ending hunger and achieving food security and improved nutrition and promoting sustainable agriculture. The Ministry of Trade and Industry is responsible for leading the drive to position Trinidad and Tobago as a manufacturing base and as the business, trade, and financial hub of the Americas. The Ministry's core responsibility is to grow trade, business, and investment, particularly through driving the non-energy sectors of the economy, of which the food, beverage, and agro-processing sectors are a part. As a pivotal agency for trade promotion and development, the Ministry manages and coordinates the trade process to ensure access to international markets for companies located here. The Ministry is also tasked with driving investments, inward investments, in a number of sectors. In this regard, the Ministry continues to work with across the public sector, but particularly with the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Marine Affairs towards ensuring that Trinidad and Tobago is food secure and is in alignment with Sustainable Goal number 20, hunger. The Ministry now welcomes any questions and will seek to make available any necessary information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam PS. And finally, the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members of the committee, colleagues, good afternoon again. Ending hunger is one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and is defined as the objective to ensure that everyone has access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and preferences, and that all people have the ability to acquire the food they need without compromising their economic, social, and environmental well-being. Data, however, is suggesting that although there is more than enough food produced today to feed many people, there are upward of 828 million people that remain chronically undernourished, and that malnutrition is taking a heavy toll across developing and developed nations. This may not be our story, but in Trinidad and Tobago, this could easily be the case. Here, the government is making significant investment in the social sector, mainly in support of the most vulnerable in society. At the Gender and Child Affairs Division alone, more than $1 billion was invested in childcare and protection over the period 2015 to 2022. Over the same period, from data, over $33 billion was spent on grants administered by the Social Development and Family Services. And this investment is just for 2 arms of the state and for selected programs. The solution may not necessarily be about how much is being invested to end poverty and hunger and the many other social ills in this country, but rather on how we choose to do business in the sector. The issue of poverty and hunger are extremely important issues which must be confronted. It is for this reason that we welcome today's meeting and look forward to the outcomes of this session. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ole. And I think I'd like to start off the discussion with a statement made by the PS of OPM, if I remember well. It's not a question of how much, but how we choose to spend it. And therefore, I turn to the PS of Planning and Development. And I really would like us to put into context for the discussion how we define poor, how we define vulnerable, how we define indigent.
So, good afternoon again. Based on our response to the question, we would have indicated that the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, they would have adapted the international definition to suit the circumstances in Trinidad and Tobago. So, we would have indicated that the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services described the vulnerable groups as those groups or communities which experience social exclusion, discrimination, inequality, and marginalization. Poor individuals and or persons in vulnerable situations include populations that live in poverty without access to safe housing, water, sanitation, and nutrition, and those who are stigmatized, discriminated against, marginalized by society, and even criminalized in law, policy, and practice. And of course, examples included the impoverished children and youth, women, disabled persons, the elderly, migrants, and transient workers.
So I get the impression from that very definition that poor individuals and or persons. So what makes you poor as distinct from vulnerable? Because this definition, which we're given here, it seems that poor and or vulnerable people are one and the same. Okay, and from the submission, I tend to get the impression that vulnerable might be a wider category than poor, but the statistics don't seem to show that, the statistics that you all have provided. So I'm trying for the discussion for us to sort of flesh out what we're talking about for the benefit of the committee and for the listening public.
You said the vulnerable is broader than this, just poor. Okay, so well, according to the Survey of Living Conditions, a poor person would be described as someone whose, well, their income would have been below a certain figure. Now, we don't have recent data and information. We are using data from 2005, and I believe it was $1.25 US that we were looking at as the persons below a certain income level. A vulnerable person may not necessarily be poor in terms of income, but they are discriminated against because of their persuasion. They may be dependent, like a child would be dependent.
So basically, from a purely theoretical perspective, poor, we're looking at income, right? And is that the poverty line that, so if you beneath the poverty line, you're poor?
So if you are below a certain level of income, you are unable to purchase a certain basket of goods, you are considered poor.
And what determines that level? Is it the poverty line?
The poverty line,
yes.
And then when there's the indigent, which is even more considered even poorer than poor, because you can't even afford basic items, right? And as I indicated, we will have information from the CSO, Survey of Living Conditions, by next year, probably around August next year, where we will be able to establish a new poverty line, and we should be able to compare with the 2005, which was the last official set of data that we would have.
So at this current time, the Ministry of Planning and Development is still working with the 2005 figures of the survey of what is poor.
That's the official.
Right? Okay, so somewhere in the discussion, somebody spoke about the all-government approach. I think it may have been the PS in agriculture. And I just wanted to ask the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, since we have an all-government approach, how does what the Ministry of Planning and Development defines poverty lines up with what you do and your business? Because 2005 is a very long time ago, and you are in the business of providing grants, which would bring relief to people who are considered poor. So how does that line up with what your definition is of the poverty line? Thank you.
Thank you, DPS. And through you, Chair, as our colleagues would have mentioned earlier, the current SLC, the official SLC, the Survey of Living Condition Report 2005, has a poverty line of $665 currently. At the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, we utilize the poverty line in the implementation of our standard means test to qualify persons for specific social intervention initiatives. During this, currently, we utilize a poverty line of $1,439.02. How we came up with that figure is that we would have inflated the poverty line that is included in the 2005 SLC report by looking at current food prices to determine the indigent line. That line would then be further inflated to include a non-food component, and that is how we came up with the poverty line of 1439.02.
Thank you. Is Dr. or Mr. Raymond? Which one? Doctor? Dr. Raymond. So in terms of, again, coming back to the all-government approach, how does the Ministry of Planning and Development line up its position with the position of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services? Because that's a great difference. How do you, because I expect this information is shared, so is it that it is not accepted as a position with respect to what the poverty line is? Is it because it's not official from your survey that, so, I want to get some sort of clarification on how the Ministry of Planning and Development views this poverty line that the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services has had to innovate for them to really reach the people who are in need of funding.
Certainly, I think it is important to come up with a more realistic measure of poverty, because the Ministry of Social Development is close to the ground, and they are the ones that are offering these services, the food cards and public assistance to the population. We have no issue with the imputation of a poverty line in the absence of something official, because 2005, a lot has changed in terms of prices and so forth. So we have no issue with that.
Okay, thank you. So coming back to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, in your submission, you referred to this National Register of Vulnerable Persons. If you could tell us a little bit about where that is reached, what it's intended to do, and whether that register would also include poor people who are determined as poor based on your definition of the poverty line.
To allow the decision makers in this country to have the relevant data that would put them in a place of knowing who or how many people are poor, how many persons are close to the poverty line, and how many people are way beyond that. At this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Sion, who is one of the officers we have at the ministry working on this project, to give you an update on where they are with the project.
Thank you, DPS, and through you, Chair. The National Register of Vulnerable Persons is a computer database system that the ministry is currently working on that will be used to collect, store, and process information on the vulnerable population of Trinidad and Tobago. What we plan to do is to have a standardized assessment of vulnerability for individuals and households across the country, and that will help the ministry and all partners within the social sector better target persons and households for social intervention initiatives. Where we are currently, we are hoping by next month, June of 2023, to finalize the solution. Subsequent to that, we'll have the official handing over from the United Nations Development Program to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. And we anticipate that we would have the launch of the system by before the end of 2023.
So I understand it's computer-based. How do you then gather the data for input? Because I always remember learning computers in the days of DOS and learning this term GIGO. Okay, so how do you gather, verify the information that is going to be inputted? And this standardized assessment, it's going to be ahead of the national survey. So how the two things are going to line up eventually?
Through you, Chair. Currently, we are looking at assessing vulnerability across 6 dimensions, utilizing over 20 indicators of deprivation. In terms of populating the register of vulnerable persons, we are currently looking at several options in terms of modalities for populating the register of vulnerable persons, and this will be done through several phases. We are hoping at some point we can work with the Ministry of Planning through the CSO, because the CSO currently conducts studies on vulnerability via the Survey of Living Condition, as well as some vital information will also come from the National Population Census. That information will then be supplemented by further, what I would say, field exercises where we can collect additional data points to satisfy the vulnerability profiles that will be included in the vulnerability register. So that is some of the ways that we're looking at currently in populating the register at this time.
And you'll forgive me. So it means that the manner in which the data is going to be gathered for populating the register, that hasn't been settled. That is what is going to be settled by June?
No, yes, we're currently looking at a mixed modality, whereby we will collect data by going out into the fields. We'll also be utilizing data, as I mentioned, that the Ministry of Planning currently is in the fields collecting from the SLC as well as the National Census. We also have existing databases at the various ministries and social sector agencies that would have information that will be vital to determining the vulnerability of persons and households. So it's a mixed modality whereby we'll be continuously updating the information stored in the vulnerability register to make sure that we are able to assess persons in real time.
Might I ask if your ministry has field officers or you have to recruit field officers?
The ministry currently has field officers in our social welfare division that collects data on our clients, and that data is stored in existing databases, which we will utilize. We also anticipate that at some point in time, we'll have to employ additional staff to assist with the population of the register, because we anticipate that we would need data on a large cross-section of the population to populate the register. So at some point in time, we would be looking to employ additional staff.
Okay, and that hasn't reached anywhere as yet, because my understanding, I might be getting this wrong, you said by June
Yes,
this
by
year?
June we will have the finalization of the solution.
Right, and it's next year you would have had your, at least your register up and running. Did I get that right?
Yes, before the end of this year.
Before the end of this year. So the employment of staff and all of that, where is that?
Yes, that's currently in train, where we are looking to hire persons to start phase 1 of the data collection, as I said, and cleansing of the data within our existing databases at the ministry, which will form phase 1 of the exercise.
Okay, and you have an idea of how much staff you need? And have the ads gone out? Where have you actually reached in that?
Yes, we have a proposal, and we are waiting approval of the proposal. And as I said, we hope to implement subsequent to that.
Okay, thank you. Might I invite Dr. Bodo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up with regards to the vulnerability register and to say, well, you know, it's something that, as an elected representative, member of parliament, I look forward to, because we're very familiar with vulnerable out there. So in terms of your data gathering, is any consideration being given to collecting data from members of parliament, for example, and local government councillors who would not only have many requests, but will also have done some field work to verify that some of these persons are indeed poor and vulnerable? So that's the first question. And the second would be, when this register is completed, will it be easily accessible by MPs and councillors?
The PS answer that, or Dr. Raymond? Yes, I think this is for you.
Through you, Chair. In terms of the response to the questions, in the general population, meaning individuals as well as all members of households will have access to input data directly into the register, and subsequent to that, the officials from the ministry will conduct an exercise to verify the information before it is utilized in calculating persons and households' vulnerability profile.
Thank you. So you said households will have access. Will it be online in terms of using their phones and stuff like that?
Yes.
All right. Well, I suspect that the question kind of caught you off guard, but in terms of that, can I ask if consideration can be given to that very valuable source of data as you go forward? I can direct that to PS.
The ministry would consider your recommendation. Through the chair.
Thank you, Chair. And this is to the PS in Planning and Development with regards to the 2023 household budget survey and the survey of living conditions. Can you indicate whether that has started, and if so, when is it expected to be completed on PS?
Yes, so good afternoon again. Yes, the joint survey of the household budgetary survey and survey of living conditions has started February of this year, and it's expected to be completed February of 2024, and the report is expected 6 months thereafter, so around August next year we expect to have the reports.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon again, everyone. So I'm asking this question. I don't know who specifically is going to answer, but so far, what I've been hearing when each of the PSs gave their introductions is that some way or the other, each ministry before us here today are dealing with vulnerable parts of the population, vulnerability in some way or the other. And the subject of the discussion today is food security. So some way or the other, all of us here are dealing with food security or addressing this problem of food security to meet that SDG of zero hunger. So my first question is, when was the last time or when was the last meeting with all PSs across these ministries to discuss this issue of food security?
None that we are aware of. During the development of the Vision 2030 document, food security is definitely one of those areas identified as a priority area. And the Ministry of Planning and Development would have gone out to the various ministries, agencies for discussions and so, but not on just the particular issue of food security. There were about 10 areas, I think, identified as priority areas.
Okay. Thank you so much, PS. PS, I asked that question because while I heard the Ministry of Social Development answering the chairman's questions, as an economist, what I was hearing was a duplication of the survey of living conditions taking place. It sounds as if, because on one hand, you have the Ministry of Planning and Development in the process of doing the survey of living conditions to gather the internationally recognized data that will form that internationally recognized poverty line, vulnerability indicator, and also the indigent, I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, population. That would be internationally recognized data based on a specific survey, a cluster sample, and so on. Design your sampling frame. I won't go through the technical details to get that data, right? To define what the poverty line is and how many persons are vulnerable or are poor in Trinidad and Tobago. But then I'm hearing that the Ministry of Social Development is in a situation where they need to allocate, they have been giving out grants because they need to deal with a short-term, a current situation, and they just simply don't have the data. So they need to do something. And what they have been doing is trying to find a way first to deal with the existing data, the existing poverty line that exists, which is the $665 per month, which works out to, and they have inflated it, from what I understand, to $1,439 per month. That's correct? Right. And when you work that out per day, that is working out to $7 TT per day, when the international poverty line is $2.15 US per day. So we already not across international standards. But what I'm hearing through you, Chair, is that the Ministry of Social Development is also doing their own data gathering exercise to build they're building 6 dimensions across 20 indicators to establish a database so that you all could pinpoint more efficiently who are vulnerable and who are very much deserving of these grants to satisfy the means test. Is that correct? Is that correct? Could please clarify, PS?
See, I want to take this question. Okay.
Yes, you are correct in terms of we'll be assessing vulnerability across 6 dimensions, utilizing just over 20 indicators of deprivation.
Through you, Chair, to me this sounds like a duplication of effort. Wouldn't it be a little more efficient to have the data from CSO that falls under the Ministry of Planning and Development? Because the data from CSO will be available by June next year, mid next year, and then...
Yes, by August of next year, and the mixed survey, which collects data and information on women and children, will be available by June, July of this year.
Okay, all right. So I just want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts here to achieve the same result. And I'm not too sure if that is happening, which is why I'm asking the question. which is why I asked the first question, when was the last meeting across all PSs, across these ministries, to discuss this issue of food security and how we're dealing with the vulnerable population?
Through you, Chair, respectfully, what you have happening here is not a duplication of efforts. CSO gathers data, but correct me if I'm wrong, what we are trying to do for the National Vulnerability Register is to compile information on the vulnerable. Now, while you have samples being taken, in some instances, what we are trying to gather is the family, all the information you want to gather on the clients. That would allow us to treat with a family holistically. While the data gathered by CSO would provide you with percentages and the like, this data in the vulnerability register will actually provide you with the information on the client, the name of the clients, where they live, how many people in the household, information that is unique to the work that we have to do when treating with the vulnerable. I am not taking away from the work that CSO does. That is very important work, and we depend on them for their data, because that data is an input into us getting our standards means test. And it is data that allows us to do our work right now. And many organizations within this country depend on that data. What we are trying to build goes a little further than what is provided by CSO. It allows us to drill down to where the need is. It allows us to look at instances where you have family, they are not yet vulnerable, but when you have little shocks, these people could be thrown into a state of vulnerability. It allows our government, it will allow our government to be able to plan for these things and be able to not be taken off guard as we might have been with COVID. Right? Instances of the floods and stuff like that, all that information, we should be able to have that there, the location of these people, where you have more vulnerable people, people income, all of that information is valuable information that we would need to allow us to make decisions, to plan for how many people we might have going to need, how many people might be coming off, or what programs we could put in place to mitigate these risks that we see.
Through you, Chair, if I continue. Thank you so much, PS, for clarifying. But you also indicated that so is it that persons who come to you seeking help, information that you are gathering? Because from what I understood, the doctor said in the back was that you all are going out to gather data as well.
Through you, Chair, as Dr. Sion would have indicated, we have some data in our system that will be used. But in order to be current, we will definitely need to go out to update. It should be understood that the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services has a wide base of clientele. Now that allows us to, right now, be able to get information, and as Sion would have indicated, through data cleansing, to update this information that would provide us with a base of valuable information. But based on how we have been treating with clients in the past, we need to go a little further. So it's not just about somebody who might need a particular grant. You want to look at it holistically. So you want to look at the entire family, not just the one person who comes to you for maybe a disability grant or a senior citizen grant. You want to look at everybody in the household the whole story. You want to get all that information on it. So yes, we have information on our database which we would utilize, but there will be a need for us to go out to get additional information to ensure that it's up to date and it would allow us to do what we want to do with the data.
Chair, I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm having difficulty in understanding, so I will just ask one more question, two more questions to clarify. One to the PS in Ministry of Social Development and one to the PS in Ministry of Planning. So, PS in Ministry of Social Development, so from what I gather, you are updating your existing database by going out and seeking additional information on that household. And what you're also doing, are you also going to seek additional information from other households from your analysis that you perceive to be in a vulnerable position? Because what I am trying to gather is how are you selecting your sample? Which is, so I understand if it is you are already zeroing, if you are going to already zero in into the existing household from your existing clients. That would make sense. But if you are going outside to seek information on people who may become vulnerable, who are not vulnerable, and may become vulnerable, then we are talking about the Ministry of Planning and Development's work here.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to start and I will ask Dr. Sia to help me out. No, we are not going to be doing a sample. We want to have information that will allow us to know what the situation is across the country, right? This country, I don't have all the information right now, but this country is not the only country who would have done an exercise like this. I think it was Colombia that has done an exercise like this that has worked for them. And that is the model that we're using. So this is not a situation where you just look at a sample. We want to know what is happening straight across. And yes, it might sound confusing and it might sound like we are duplicating what CSO is doing, but that's not the case. Now, if at the time we were embarking on this, we would have moved quickly enough, we might have been able to partner with CSO, where you would have had all the various indicators that they want to take into consideration on their instrument when they were going out, so that that part of it would not need to be replicated. But that is not the situation that has happened, right? So we still have need for data that they will not be capturing when they go out. Yes, it would seem like a duplication. I would think so too, if I did not know that their instrument would not capture everything that we need. It's not a duplication.
Okay. Last question, Madam Chair. PS in Ministry of Planning. From your understanding from this discussion, and of course through your exchanges prior, I show you all exchange work on strategies, methodologies, and so on. Do you see that the information that is being gathered from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Service is information that the Household Budgetary Survey can provide?
Well, so in respect of the timing, the information, the data and information from the HBS SLC will be available August next year. There are persons who are in need of assistance. I am not seeing a major issue at this point in time with the Ministry of Social Development using their existing database. They are the ones who are on the ground who would be able to identify persons who would be in need of assistance. Maybe those who are on the verge of falling into poverty or becoming more vulnerable. I am not seeing it as a major duplication.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So what I think we would like to find out from social development and Family Services. In terms of your means test, in terms of your current scenario with having defined the poverty line, could you give us an idea of how that meets your system, your calculations, your formulae, how that really meets and treats with people, the actual numbers of people who are in need of assistance, either because they're poor, they're indigent, or they, what's the other word? They vulnerable. How, because we hear in systems, but I think what we're looking for is reach. You understand? I think that's what's missing for us. And I think that's why we're having a little problem. Because one, I think it's clear, we do have a system that really identifies people. Okay? And what we're talking about is people. We're not talking about formulae. Okay? I think I understand from somebody, we're spending a lot of money. How do we know, okay, we only fill in 10% of the need, or we fill in 100% of the need? Okay, how do we know that? Or it may not that we intend to meet 100%, but by this system we have, what are we targeting, and how are we able to measure how far off we are in the target, or we have exceeded the target? Or I think this is what we're trying to find out. And it's only you all can tell us that.
Thank you for that question, Chair. Now, based on what you are asking us, in order for the ministry to know what percentage of the persons who are in need, needs that we are meeting, we need to first have a baseline for that. Without a National Vulnerability Register, we would not be able to pinpoint actually how many people in the population of Trinidad and Tobago falls below the poverty line. Based on the data, the last set of data we have, and that is outdated by now, that we think it was 2011, based on our responses that we would have put up, we had some figures on what the percentage of persons in the country that were vulnerable. And that is only a percentage. All right. Okay, and that was the 2005 figure. I'm seeing here Central Statistical Office in 2011, we had a figure that showed all right, it had a 15.5% of the persons were considered poor, and then it had a 1.2 that were considered indigent. Now, it should be understood that that is data from since 2005 that was gathered based on the information we had. So now, for us to be able to accurately have a base and work with it, we would need additional information telling us what percentage of the population is poor, what percentage is indigent, and we would be able to work from that base, considering our data. We'll be able to tell whether or not we have met at least that, or we are actually serving a greater percentage of persons who are actually poor or vulnerable. We can only say how many people are actually accessing our grants and how many clients we have on the books.
Okay, so let me use a figure you gave me. This is page 3 of your submission, where you're saying, according to the United Nations Development Program Human Development Report 2011 study.
Yes.
I accept you taking that as credible if you give it to us, right?
Yes.
You're saying there are 9,000 people who are multidimensionally poor, with 51,000 who are vulnerable to multidimensionally poor, right?
Right, so that would have been information they provided. I want to ask my colleague, did we calculate based on the population at that time?
In terms of the 20. Oh. Through you, Chair.
Yes.
That's the figure that we mentioned here came
No,
from...
I didn't mention. That's the figure you mentioned.
Yes, the figure that we mentioned here from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, that came from 2022 United Nations Development Program report, but that report utilized 2011 data to calculate the multidimensional poverty index for Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. How do you measure against that?
Right, so if we can, through you again, Chair, in terms of your initial question, what the ministry would do some projections. We did some projections concerning the poverty as well as the indigent population, utilizing the most recent data we have from the SLC as well as the National Census report. So back in 2005, when the SLC would have been conducted, it was estimated that, let's use for example, that 1.2% of the population was considered to be indigent. And if you utilize the population census data for that time, which would have been the 2000 census data, we get approximately around 15,000, just over 15,000 persons utilizing that 1.2%. Now, if we utilize the same 1.2% and we look at the 2011 census report, that would give us an average of 15,936 persons would have been considered indigent utilizing the same 1.3%. And if we use the midterm population estimates for 2022 that the CSO has on its website, it will give us a figure of just over 16,000 persons if we utilize that same 1.2%. Now, if we utilize that figure in terms of our ministry's coverage to that particular population, we will focus on our food support grant. And currently, as at April 30th, 2023, our ministry clients totaled 18,499 persons, which is over that estimated 16,390 persons. So, and if you also look at that figure, it doesn't just speak to individuals because it considers households as well, which could include more than one individual. So it gives you an idea of the ministry coverage in that particular area.
Okay, so let me ask you, how effective you are then?
Yeah, so that gives us a good understanding of where we at, but the
how
survey
effective are you? You rate yourself. You rate yourself. How effective are you? And I mean the ministry, and not, you understand?
Yes.
Chair, considering the information that has been brought to the fore, it will appear that we have far gone beyond what is expected of us. But we need to understand that that is outdated information. And when CSO is finished with their work, we would really have a true picture of what the poverty line is and what the indigent is. Because when that is presented to us, we might very well find out that maybe...
You trade away money?
No, maybe we need to do more. But of course, we have to wait for that data to come.
Okay. Okay, I think we get a full picture. You have a mandate, and you have to find a way to fulfill your mandate. And you've tried to work as best with some projections. And therefore, it'll be a wrong conclusion to say, because meeting 18,000 people, and this figure gives you 16,000 people, it'll be wrong to say you're doing good or better than better, right? And therefore, quite frankly, you can't rank yourself. Okay, I think that's what we understand. All right. Okay, so Dr. Boda, I believe you wanted to come in the conversation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will stay on the Ministry of Social Development, and just to go into the grants, which is in the appendix, just for the clarity of the public and for the committee, with regards to the general assistance grant, and there are several items listed here, and of course one of the expenses that households and persons incur, which can impact on their ability to buy food, would be other expenses like medical equipment, prosthetics, and the pharmaceutical grant. So can I inquire through you, Madam PS, the limit for medical equipment, or the amounts for medical equipment, prosthetics, and the pharmaceutical grants, whether those are one-time grants in a year, or how can how is it available?
Okay. Yes, through you, Chair. Prosthetic, most of these grants are one-off grants. They may be one-off for a period, for example, 2 years, every 2 years, or every 3 years, depending on the grant. Prosthetic, the amount is up to 40,000.
40?
Yes. Yes.
40?
Yes.
Okay.
40,000. Medical, pharmaceutical is 2,500 for a supply of 3 months. And that is once
every 3 months?
That is once every 2 years.
Or you can get, okay, so you get 3 months.
So
once
it's
every
like
2
a
years.
2-year cycle,
All
right? But you get for a maximum of 3 months at one time.
Yeah, and the limit for medical equipment?
Medical equipment is 7,000.
And that's a one-time, how often?
And that again is every 3 years, a 3-year cycle.
All right. And as we are on this appendix as well, if we can go back to the first page with regards to the food support program, and if we look at the figures for the 1 to 3 persons, 4 to 5 persons, and 6+ persons, and we see the figures there: 510, 650, 800. Can you indicate, how you'd have come up with those figures?
So the 1 to 3 persons, through you, Chair, we are referring to household size, and the amount there, based on policy, we looked at what the cost of basic food items that will provide a nutritional meal for a family, and based on that, the ministry came up with these figures.
In view of the current situation where you might have increased food prices and so on, is any consideration being given to revise these figures?
Well, that is a matter to be taken up at the executive level. We'll certainly probably look at reviewing those figures.
So you intend to make those recommendations, is that what you're saying? Madam PS.
Through you, Chair, when we have updated information that will inform the real poverty line in the country, recommendations would be made to our executive, and it will be taken from there.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Okay, so 2 questions I want to ask, and maybe Ms. Fortune, you can help me. I'm hoping this is a mistake. Public assistance grant. It tells me it is also granted on behalf of the necessitous children where the father or both parents, where the father is or both parents are dead. What happens if a mother is involved?
Yes.
It's in page 1 on the table. Tell me it's an error.
No, well, it's how it's worded. It's not, it can be paid either to a father where the mother has died or to mother where the father has died. It's just that it's not stated here. So it's an error. It's really an error.
Okay, good, thanks. All right, and the second thing, and I think maybe it might be more in line with what Dr. Budu was asking, in terms of if you all have been very innovative in trying to meet your lack of data in devising a mechanism to define a poverty line, how come you don't do it more regularly? How come we're still in 2016? Because whatever gave you the latitude to inflate the 2005 position and bring it to 2016, I would expect that that same authority, for want of a better word, should allow you to make your figure a little more realistic. You're already off the mark because you don't have baseline information. So that's what I'm wondering. How come you stop at this 2016, and particularly everybody talking about pandemic and how pandemic exacerbate everything? How come we waiting on next year, all things being equal with CSO?
Thank you for that question, Chair. The ministry is presently reviewing our data. But considering what is happening with CSO, by the time we are finished reviewing, they might very well have that information out for us. But it should be noted that we are presently reviewing what our figures. We have been actively doing that.
And you expect your exercise to take how long?
Well, we're hoping that it's concluded before CSO is finished.
So, no, but seriously, I mean, CSO tells us August, all things being equal.
Yes.
Okay? You recognize that here what? You can't wait on them, or else you'll be still working with a 664, I think, figure, or 669, whatever it is, figure, right? You've recognized that well prior to now, because in coming up with your 2016 figure, right, you started before that. And therefore, what kind of projection you have for your exercise?
Okay. Now, in line of the figures, the 510, 650, and 800, for those figures to be changed, that will have to be a cabinet decision.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in respect of the poverty line that we are looking to look at the basket and see what is really realistic right now in 2023. That exercise might take us next 3 months or so.
You've started?
Yes, we have started looking at it. However, while we might be doing that, because CSO is presently actively doing their work, I believe a decision might be taken to wait for that data, because we would be able to get official data, as against going down the road again of getting a basket and doing something in the interim, because their exercise has already started.
Okay, let me ask Ministry of Trade and Industry. You do something with a basket of goods too, yes? Where you go to groceries and I think it's 40 groceries or something like that. You see, what's missing for us is this all-government approach. And the question that Member Dionerine asked about duplication, while hers might be specific to a particular thing, it appears to us that there may exist in your various ministries information and data that could help solve issues that the other dealing with. So her first question is, when last you all met? So I think Ministry of Trade, you might be able to help us out here.
Thank you for that question, Chair. And through you, Chair, the Consumer Affairs Division of the Ministry of Trade and Industry is tasked with monitoring the consumer environment. And what that division does, they conduct a retail price survey on a monthly basis They look at 180 items, basic food items, at 41 supermarkets across 21 areas in Trinidad and Tobago. And this data is published every month on the ministry's website and quarterly in the newspapers. So there are a specific number of items that the Consumer Affairs Division would look at.
Okay. And let me ask Ministry of Health. Based on the 118 items that Ministry of Trade and Industry looks at regularly, have you been able to identify whether any of those will make a basic basket of goods, or if they are luxurious ones? Have you been able, because then you should be able, if you could say, well, these are what will be a basic nutritional basket of goods, based on their prices, we know what it costs, that the information could go to the Ministry of Social Development. I mean, I really bad at maths, but tell me, have you looked at what they have, what they do?
I'm unable to answer that question at this time.
Maybe I should ask Doctor, the Chief Public Health Inspector, Dr. Tukaran.
Likewise, my function is based on food safety.
Oh, yes, yes.
So I likewise do not have that information in terms of whether the ministry would look at that from a nutritional standpoint. Unfortunately, the chief nutritionist should have been here with us today, but she had an emergency that she's dealing with.
Yeah, so let me ask then. I don't know, PS, I always think planning and development knows everything and could solve everything. Can that work?
Just to clarify, Chair, when you say if that can work, you mean that each ministry, agency seems to be working in silos? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to make a determination like that. What I'm hearing is the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services has an issue in really seeing what the poverty line is, okay? And they use an income marker that they depended on you to give them since we know however long and for whatever good reasons, right? It's an income marker based on what will be a basic basket of goods. Ministry of Trade and Industry is collecting data. How often you tell me again, PS? Every month? Every quarter?
Every month.
Every month. Telling us more than what is a basic basket of goods, because I can't think 118 items in a basic basket of goods. But of course, we understand that what I think is basic, you mightn't think is basic. But we're looking at nutrition. I think Ministry of Health is the entity who could give us some credible information about nutrition.
Okay.
So to me, what I'm asking is, couldn't Ministry of Health look at the information that Ministry of Trade and Industry is gathering to advise the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services what will be a basic item, basket of goods that will cost $10 or $15 based on the information, which is every month, which if I listen to the radio, it seemed that it moving every month. I don't know, but of course their data will tell. And therefore we have some kind of scientific basis for looking at a poverty line when we might not have money to do, or resources, or COVID, and all those things, to do a survey. Can that work?
I'm not sure how representative it's two supermarkets in a particular area.
Can the 3 PSs, the 4 PSs have a discussion about that?
Yes.
Huh?
Certainly, Chair.
Yes, definitely. Definitely have a discussion.
I thought you were going to tell me the law, because I was going to say then therefore what Social Development and Family Services doing with this $1,400 is,
No,
okay, we don't want to get anybody in trouble here. But
and certainly the Ministry of Health can advise on what are the nutritional items, so maybe they can advise on.
The PS said their mandate is healthy population, initiatives to nutritious foods. That's what the PS said to me. I didn't make that up. Okay? So, I think one of the things we'll ask is for that discussion to take place. And for us to come back and give us some guidance with respect to what a nutritious basket of goods at the basic level should look like and what it should cost. I think that could be done. Yes, thank you. Help me again. This is Ministry of...
Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
So, Chair, through you, my understanding is that these things do take place. I think when they begin to do the survey of living condition, they come up with a basket of goods. And they usually depend on several entities. The Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute is one such agency that helps them to determine the caloric value that are contained in various food items. And as a result of those discussions, they proceed to create a food basket, albeit the SLC, the food basket, is not necessarily only on food, but some other items as well. Yeah? And in fact, the Gender and Child Affairs Division, as well as Ministry of Social Development, usually rely on that basket of food when making determination as to what goes into a hamper, because they do distribute hamper, as well as when calculating the cost of the basket, what goes into that basket. So that body of information, and usually the SLC would explain how they come up with that and the caloric intake. I think the caloric intake is probably usually 24 or probably 2,700. In other countries it vary. And usually we have a listing of the food item that is usually contained in those baskets. Yeah, so it is usually available, and it is possibly in the in reports in the survey of living condition as well.
But I think thank you, is outdated, but I think what Mr. Ramdahin, yes? No, this is Mr. Ganga Prasad, yes? I think what you're telling us is there's a model to be followed, okay? And I think just based on the innovative ways social development and family services has operated, I think a discussion with their colleagues and will help them much more. Okay, so I just want to ask, I find it astounding. Is this country on track to meet the specific target by 2030? Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon again. Chair, I would hazard to say it is difficult at this time to say definitively whether Trinidad and Tobago is on track, because we do not have the baseline data to measure progress. But I must say that there are a lot of initiatives that are taking place, public sector, private sector, civil society, even our international development partners. The UN has been working with civil society, and I know that a lot is happening. It's just that we have not been able to measure the progress as yet. We are hoping to put the mechanisms in place shortly to be able to do that.
Might I ask a time frame for shortly? What year are we in again? I think we're in 2023, so it's 6 years to 2030. So what is shortly in terms of getting the data?
Well, as I indicated, the mix survey, the results will be available in a couple of months.
Yes.
That will report on women, children, and we'll have information on nutrition and so. That can be used almost immediately. we're just a couple of months away from that. The survey of living conditions and the household budgetary survey, however, would not be available until August next year, which is why I indicated I didn't
And we
have
have
a problem.
5 more years left.
And, well, 5 or 6, yeah.
5?
Yeah. So we are a little more than midway through. I would want to hazard a guess and say that we can still achieve the target, because a lot, as I said, is being done. It's just that it's not being measured.
Okay.
So once we have the mechanisms in place to be able to measure, currently the Ministry of Planning and Development is liaising with the UN to have a consultant work with us to develop a data repository for the SDGs. We are also looking at having a dedicated statistical officer within the CSO to collect and report on the SDGs. And we're also looking to strengthen the Ministry of Planning and Development's SDG. Well, we don't really have a unit, we have a person, so we are hoping to hire a couple of persons. We are looking to do that within the next month or so, to be able to have that dedicated monitoring of the SDGs.
Okay, thank you. Senator Islam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot could be happening, but without data, we could be shooting in the dark. But this, I think, we could segue a little bit to the Ministry of Agriculture, because food sustainability, you are the backbone of that. And one of the things I would like to ask first and foremost, how do we get to the place where you are fully aware of whether you are adding value to the conversation of food sustainability? You have questions about, simple questions. What is the benefit of being a registered farmer? What's the benefit to the farmer? But more so, what is the benefit to the ministry? Because we know all the incentives that go into, that farmers receive as being registered. But what is the benefit to the Ministry of registered farmers? And what is your data collection mechanism? Because we can't know where we're going if we don't know what we're dealing with.
Okay. Thank you, Member. And in terms of data collection, and I'm hearing from my other colleagues, we're all into this data-driven. It's an issue that we have with the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of how we capture data, but we are trying in terms of now we are trying to get a farmer registration system. We are digitalizing into how we capture data, and that will enable us, of course, in our database, we will generate the reports that will allow us to make more informed decisions. But in developing those systems, what we really try to get at is the voice of the customer. Well, they will identify the user requirement, what they expected of the Ministry of Agriculture, and in so doing, when we have met their requirements, of course, that will enhance their production, their quality, etc., which of course will feed into having more in terms of achieving our food security. So it all ties in, and I am saying our trust for digital transformation, of course, would only help that process. But in terms of the farmer and how the ministry would help them, you mentioned incentives, but they are the incentives for the registered farmer. The issue sometimes with the farmer in being registered is in terms of it's a manual process, so it takes some time. Sometimes. So as I said, we are trying in terms of have farmer registration online. We would also like to integrate to that system where they can access the agriculture incentive program, because it's a long and tedious process where our field officers will have to go and verify the information every year when there's a flood or when there's other grants that will be offered to them. And we have to verify the same information everywhere. I know one of the members spoke of duplication of effort. So we are trying to avoid that in terms of our digitalization. So they will be able to register online, they will be able to access the incentive online. And of course, in terms of processing the incentive, we will have to look at our work processes to see how best we can improve on that in terms of timely processing of those incentive and grants.
What's the average time between applying for, or as a registered farmer, what's the average time between your receipt, your application for your incentive and your receipt, and also online? So I'm going to ask these two questions.
Okay, to remember.
I am a farmer,
right,
out in the field. We're talking about registering online. How many farmers in these rural communities have access to the ICT services to be registered online, and how long does it take for me to receive an incentive?
Okay, so firstly, we haven't implemented the online system yet.
Okay.
It's still in development stage. But presently, the registration process takes approximately 3 months. However, the incentives might take sometimes a bit longer.
How much is a bit longer?
I'm not sure of the time frame. I'll have to provide that information to
So,
you.
Madam Chair, so are the farmers saying that they want the services for them to be registered online? Are they saying that?
Some of them, because we have some very young, innovative farmers, and they, of course, they will like the accessibility. So some of them, they, of course, are resistant to change. But in terms of progressing, we will also have resistance to change. But how would the ministry address that? We would have to, of course, have awareness and training session, etc., to be able to help them to be able to even use the system online, because that would take us into literacy.
Okay. So when we talk about the SDG of zero hunger, has the Ministry of Agriculture set goals or pathways to assist the country in achieving that?
Yes, we have set some goals on some initiatives, and we have some memorandum of understanding presently with Guyana. And through you, Chair, I will ask our technical advisor to give us some more details on our initiatives in terms of revitalizing the rice industry, the coconut industry, and cocoa. Mr. Wright.
Good afternoon. Through you, Madam Chair, the Ministry of Agriculture, we would have had certain goals set over a period of time with respect to achieving certain levels of production for certain commodities that we see as key. So, for example, we look at the local rice industry, and we've zeroed in on rice as a staple, an important staple. And even though we have rice being imported, we have a number of acreages available for rice production locally. And we feel that we should be able to meet at least 30 to 50% of our rice requirements, local rice requirements. And therefore, we have set a target between now and 2025 to increase local rice production to meet at least 30% of what we require. So that's the model in which we're using for other key commodities, where we set particular targets. And those targets will allow us to reduce our imports and help us to be in a more food secure position.
Sure, when we talk about the food basket, how much of that food basket is set aside for fresh fruit and vegetables? Because we're not only talking about basic food items, but we also need to look at food items that assist our population in living a healthier life. So how much of that is set aside for fresh fruit and vegetables?
I'm unable to answer that question. I'm not sure what the food basket comprises in terms of the fresh fruit and vegetables.
So, Madam Chair, to the Ministry of Trade and Industry, when you do your surveys at groceries and you put out the list of items, does it include fresh fruit and vegetables?
Chair, through you, member, it does not. It would include items, basically, your flour, your milk, those types of items that you use to prepare meals, but we don't pick up what we'd call like market products, such as your vegetables and citrus and so on. It doesn't. We do pick up poultry. Yeah.
So the reality for us is that we are still focused on basic staples, which gives us a skewed, really gives us in terms of what the pricing. So when you put out your pricing, and as a consumer, I look at your price and I say, okay, fine, my grocery bill is X. I would still have to add something onto that so that my basket is now balanced. So I don't know if Madam Chair, we could make a recommendation. I don't know that when Ministry of Trade does its survey, that it also looks at market items so that the consumer's basket could now be balanced. Because it's not only about food, but it's about what kind of food. And just for me I'll finish up with agriculture in a bit, Madam Chairman, but what, in your submission, you gave a number of registered fisher folk for Trinidad. Is it that you have, I know the Division of Agriculture and Fisheries and so on in Tobago treats with the management of agriculture and fisheries, but is it that the ministry has no data as it relates to Tobago? And just a piggyback on that, do you have partnerships with the division in being part of this entire thrust to zero hunger?
Through your chair, can I ask the Director of Fisheries to be able to answer that question?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, we do have very close relationship with the Department of Marine Resources and Fisheries in Tobago. The figure that we quoted is a joint Trinidad and Tobago figure. We do assist with the processing of fishermen's ID and vessel records for Tobago. The on-the-ground information is collected in Tobago, but there is a parallel system where we work with the Department of Marine Resources because there is a need for national security intervention with respect to vessel records. So we do have a joint system where we work with the Department of Marine Resources, and these are combined figures. Yeah.
Might I invite Member Dunarine at this stage to join the conversation?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to ask a question based on what Member Hislop asked. With respect to the basket of goods, just by way of recommendation, the basket of goods that CSO uses to calculate the inflation rate includes vegetables, and it may very well be easy for just the Ministry of Trade to take that same list and just do the pricing, the monthly survey on that list, which includes vegetables. And the RPI methodology usually includes this basket of goods, which meets the health requirements and standards, so it's well balanced. So that's just one recommendation that I would give. With respect to the question that, Madam Chair, you asked to the Ministry of Planning and Development, whether they are on their way to achieving zero hunger and food security by 2030, and the PS did indicate that she is very skeptical, but quite optimistic that it still may be possible. I would like to ask, when the data becomes available, that will be your baseline data. You still have to do another household survey of living conditions or household budgetary survey to get up-to-date data to find out, to evaluate your progress, whether you've reached zero hunger or achieved that sustainable development goal by 2030. So how soon plans would start? Because look how long it took us to get from the last SLC to this SLC. We should already maybe be thinking about putting things in place for the next SLC, so that we will, after we have the baseline by next year, we will have the next survey already going in, so that we could assess whether we achieved that target?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I did have that conversation with the director of CSO. He indicated, however, that the cost of the surveys, the survey of living conditions, HBS, most likely it will be conducted joint again. It's normally done every 10 years. He indicated 10. It can be done, the HBS can be done in 5 years, of course, permitting the resources to be able to conduct. I think it is a good suggestion if we really want to measure the progress by 2030 to probably have another HBS in 5 years rather than the 10. However, we were hoping the Ministry of Planning and Development would have worked with our stakeholders to produce a voluntary report, a voluntary national report on 8 of the SDGs, not including hunger. So we are hoping to probably include SDG 2 in the next report, which we are hoping to probably conduct by 2025. So we would have some markers that we can be able to assess the progress outside of the big HBS SLC survey. All right, and we are working with a consultant with the UN, as I said, to develop that data repository and see if we can't work with the ministries, because there is already a listing of indicators, right, that we can use. It's just that we are not currently collecting data and information on some of these, which is why we would have only reported on 8 of the SDGs in 2020. So we are hoping to use that international listing and work with the ministries, agencies to try to begin collecting data and information on those so that we can report every 2 years up to 2030.
Might I invite Mrs. Morris Julian to join the conversation?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, not to be selfish or anything, but under rural infrastructure, la compensation project at Carapo, I'd just like to know the status of the PSIP projects under the Ministry of Agriculture, please.
The chair will ask our technical advisor to share the information.
Thank you very much.
Yes, good afternoon again. I think that particular question, we actually received updates from our engineering division, I think within the last week, on all of our infrastructure projects. So I would kindly ask if it is that I could probably provide that information to you at that particular time.
Just to ask a question, I'm always interested in climate change, and what is the ministry doing towards our food production with regards to solar along with biopesticides?
Yes, we have introduced a number of projects with respect to providing technology and technological support through our incentive program. We have a special grant that we provide to persons interested in technology, providing technology to improve and upgrade their facilities. So, for example, with respect to irrigation, they can utilize solar energy in powering and energizing their irrigation systems. So you mentioned solar and what else? And biopesticides. Again, there are a number of projects that we have been involved in, some projects with partners like the University of the West Indies, where we are looking towards using things like compost and composting projects, using inputs to agriculture that are non-synthetic in terms of pesticides that are more organic, And we have been working with our farmers through our training division of the ministry and encouraging farmers in terms of utilizing the more sustainable approaches to agriculture and to pest management.
Okay, one last question I have regarding agro-processing. What are the grants available? Are there grants available? That aspect, because it's not just farm to table, right? Yes, thank you.
Yes. While we do provide agro-processing grants, and we do provide some, and also our sister, our partner agency, Ministry of Trade, they also provide grants for agro-processing. But we have, in terms of our agricultural incentive program, we have establishment of facilities. We give $50,000. Refurbishing facilities, we have a $20,000 grant. And in terms of packaging material, we have a $15,000 grant. But this is with respect to persons who may be doing primary agricultural production, and they probably want to get into small-scale processing. They want to do what we call some value-added activities, some the packing facilities, etc., in preparing their items. So these are small grants that we provide for agro-processing, but those persons who are interested in accessing larger grants and larger-scale agro-processing facilities, the Ministry of Trade would be the ministry that they would access those grants from.
Could the Ministry of Trade also expand on agro-processing grants?
Chair, I would allow Mr. Alexander to respond.
Thank you, Chair and member. The Ministry of Trade and Industry, we have several initiatives that we are executing in support of the agriculture sector and agri-processing. One of the major ones that we have in place is the Moruga facility, which provides infrastructural support to agriculture and agro-processors. We also have a grant fund facility that provides support to different manufacturers, including those from the agricultural sectors, to access plant and equipment and machinery to help their competitiveness. We also have a program called the International Certification Fund. What this fund does is help our manufacturers meet international standards. Many of the applicants and successful recipients of the ICF program are able to get support to meet standards such as HACCP compliance and ISO standards, to be able to export to markets that they would not have access to before, as well as to meet the standards of some of our international companies locally who require our agricultural produce that feeds into their production and so on to meet certain standards. They are able now to satisfy those requirements and displace products that would have normally been imported. Interestingly, under that ICF fund, more than 50% of the successful applicants have been in the food and beverage sector. So we see a lot of support going there to kind of help those companies that manufacture food and food-related products to be able to do better locally as well as internationally. Thank you.
Very much. Dr. Bodo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's just two areas I want to explore. I just want to take us back to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services and to follow up on a point that you raised, Madam Chair, and other committee members raised in terms of the nutritional value of the basket of food. But I want to go a bit further to look at the food support program, and I'm just throwing it out because I don't know how feasible this is. Of course, in the age of technology, anything is possible. Now, in terms of the expenditure, I want to link this in terms of the expenditure annually on the food support program. So my first question, Madam Deputy PS, is can you give us a ballpark figure as to what kind of expenditure taxpayers incur in this food support program annually?
Chair, through you. I have some data before me that I will give you, but I will also ask permission to provide current data for you. Food support. In 2012, food support for that year, I'm seeing here, was registered as 239 million. In 2013, 224 million. Sorry, 2012, 239, 2013, 224. That is million. And let me go to the last two. 2020, 314 million. And 2021, 217 million. Right. I'm asking to provide updated information in writing.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Deputy PS. I just wanted a ballpark figure. So we're looking at over 300 million spent annually. So my question is this: if we look at the description for the food support program, it says it's really to provide vulnerable persons with access to basic food items necessary to meet their daily nutritional requirements. So is there a way to ensure that these amounts that are given on the food cards, are actually utilized at the groceries to ensure that a nutritional basket of food is purchased? Are there any guidelines, or is that something that we can give consideration to? Because we are looking at providing support, but we don't want that you use the food card, for purposes that may not impact directly on nutritional support. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that, PS.
There is actually an approved list of items that is provided to the grocers or supermarkets where all food cards are accepted. Therefore, items such as alcohol and cigarettes and the like are not expected to be purchased with food card. The list would include foods that allow the recipient of the food card to be able to procure groceries that will give them at least a basic basket of food that will meet their basic nutritional needs. I must say that the food support is assistance based on the cost of living. It is not expected that a 510 or 650 or 800 would be able to adequately provide all that is required for the client. Hence, this is assistance that is provided by the ministry towards ensuring that they have at least access to the basics.
Understood, Madam Deputy PS, and I'm happy to know there are certain guidelines. Is there any way of ensuring that these guidelines are actually met at the retail outlets? Is there any sort of follow-up from the ministry, or it's?
Presently, the most that, well, it cannot be expected that we will have persons at each checkout point to ensure that our clients, because we have a substantial amount of clients actually purchase what is expected. Yes.
So there are guidelines.
Yes.
So I just want to move on.
But these guidelines that the grocers have is what we hope that they would actually stand by what is expected of them.
Sure, thank you. Madam Chair, if I can just move on to the Ministry of Health submission. And this submission here on page 2 speaks to the 2017 WHO's Global School Health Survey for Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I know we are talking about hunger and so on, but if we look at that survey of the students who are overweight and obese, which also qualifies as a form of malnutrition, and if we were to add those two figures here, and I'm hoping this is not a typo error, so we're looking at 33.5 as overweight and 17.6 as obese. So that gives us a figure of 51.1% of the students surveyed as falling in the category of overweight and obese, unhealthy. So that is, quite startling. So, Deputy PS, if I can ask you just a few questions related to these startling figures. And of course, the strategy, I would imagine, would be to ensure proper nutrition in schools, as well as to encourage loss of calories by exercise and so on. So can you give us an indication as to overall what the approach of the ministry has been and will be going forward to address this very alarming situation in our school children?
Thank you very much. And through the chair, the ministry has worked with the Ministry of Education in providing the nutritional requirements for the menus that would be served in the school feeding program. And the ministry has been encouraging the students to get away from sugary drinks that would lead to obesity. The ministry has also been involved in providing exercise equipment to schools so that we all know that good health entails in proper diet and also activity, exercise. So we are encouraging that by providing those exercise equipment in the school.
Yeah. So with regards to the school nutrition feeding program, is there a process or is there someone who monitors the dietary requirements are met for these meals? How do you monitor that the meals that are provided by the suppliers actually meet the requirements? Is there some sort of check and balance on that?
I can't remember the exact name of the company, but I think it's a school nutrition company.
Yeah, feeding program.
For whatever. So
Yeah.
they are the ones who would monitor and ensure that the meals that are provided meet the requirements.
Right. So I know from an administrative point, this possibly may come under the Ministry of Education. That's perhaps what you're going to tell me. But again, from the input of the Ministry of Health, is there any sort of link up between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education with regards to overseeing that this program, the meals that are provided, are in fact nutritious and appropriate for these children?
I can't say with any certainty that the ministry does that. So I'll have to get back to you.
Is that something, Deputy PS, you think the Ministry of Health should be doing?
Certainly.
All right. I'll just move on in terms of the.
Madam Chair,
sorry.
just to answer, yes, there is a relationship. So I just felt the need to say that.
Sorry.
Right.
Unfortunately, you're not a witness.
But I just felt the need, yes.
Thank you, Member. So,
yes.
Deputy PS, if I can ask just about the physical activities, I'm very happy that that the equipment is being provided. Can I ask whether this is being provided at all levels, the ECCE, primary and secondary schools?
I don't have that information with me.
Is that something you can provide to us in writing? And also, if you can tell us how many schools have received such equipment. I ask this in light of the recent supplementation of the budget to the Ministry of Health, last week, and I note that some of these programs would have come under the health initiative programs.
Yes.
So if you can provide that for us in writing,
Yes.
Madam Chair. And just a last question on the TT Moves initiative. Can you give us an update on that program and how is it administered?
The TT Moves program encourages persons to move, to walk more, drink more water, and to eliminate unhealthy foodstuff in favor of fruits and vegetables. It's a campaign that is run via social media, our social media pages, newspaper ads, and so on. And it is geared towards behavior change in persons. But as we all know, behavior change is something that is not easy to come by. So with all the outreaches that we may have, with all the promotions that we may have, it is to move persons from a position of not knowing to actually doing something about it. And we continue to roll out this TT Moves program, and we would be escalating it in the near future.
It's a very commendable program, but it also sounds like something that is difficult to measure. Is there any plan, anything in place to evaluate the effectiveness of such a program? Is that part of the
monitoring and evaluation would be part of the program, so that would be done.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I now call on Member Islam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to seem as if I'm picking on the Ministry of Agriculture, but just a couple questions. As it relates to, I heard the technical advisor treat with the pesticides issue. Is there a push, or are there any plans in place by the ministry to focus on organic farming? I visited a country recently and saw acres, and the acres may be as big as Tobago, of blueberries. And the farm was completely organic. No pesticides, no chemical fertilizers, fully organic. And they produced, the reaping, the harvesting was significant. So is there any desire from the ministry to push towards a significant push towards organic farming?
It's quite an interesting question, Member. Organic agriculture and organic farming internationally requires a lot of certification, certifying bodies, etc. A lot of persons promote their products as being organic based on their promotion of it being organic. You need a lot of monitoring and evaluation and some independent auditing body that is internationally recognized to really certify your produce as being organic. I'm saying all this to say that we do encourage farmers in terms of use of pesticides and in use of their what they utilize on their farms to be as sustainable as possible, to be environmentally friendly, and also to be safe for human health. To encourage farmers into organic agriculture, then we need to provide them with the support, in terms of certification, in terms of training, etc. But if persons are desirous of entering into organic agriculture, we can provide that sort of guidance and advice to them based on our technical capabilities within the ministry. So that is basically the answer for your question.
So there isn't a significant push?
No.
Okay. You highlighted 5 areas. Now, I'm concerned that there is not a significant push towards that, because that also aids in nutritional value and also health. So I think it's something that the ministry can consider to create a program, whether it is as a pilot project, to create a program to show the benefits, as tedious as it may be, and as all the certification that you may require. I think it's something that the ministry can spend some time with, to look at ways to encourage farmers, not just wait for someone to say, we want to do organic farming, but to encourage farmers to get into organic farming. But you highlighted 5 areas in your submission. There are challenges that farmers, or challenges that the ministry has faced, that the farmers are facing: predial larceny and aging farming population, unfavorable weather conditions, geopolitical instability, increased prevalence of pests and disease, and the negative impact of COVID-19. Right? What measures has the ministry implemented to address each of these following challenges?
Okay, member, in terms of the COVID-19 and disruptions in the food supply chain, of course that affected the entire country and not only the ministry. But in terms of the pests and diseases, some of you all would be aware of the issues with the locusts and the giant African snail. So that is being addressed, and a lot of research has been done by our research department in terms of what are the measures they would be undertaken in terms of helping to eliminate or at least mitigate these problems. And those areas will ask the assistance from the Ministry of Health in terms of the pesticide use and what is safe in terms of a human. In terms of the gas project, which is the giant African snail, we are into phase 2. What happens usually when the rain begins, maybe in June, July, these snails, they emerge from hibernation as it is. So we are targeted in terms of looking at from July to December. The program right now, we are developing the program. So that should be implemented soon in terms of communication to the citizen. Okay. And of course, the geopolitical stability, which will affect the supply chain of agriculture inputs. And we all know about the Ukraine and Russian war and how it affects our wheat, which is one of our main commodities that we use. So we are trying to change personal perception in terms of what they use. We use a lot of wheat, but we are looking at value-added products in terms of how we use our cassava, etc., like cassava flour, etc. And in terms of the climate change, that would have affected our farmers a lot last year in terms of the flooding. So we are trying to help them, not only in the grants, but in terms of mitigating the adverse effects of the flooding, in terms of irrigation and floodgates, I believe. Mr. Grant, you want to help me?
Yes, member. One of the things that we've recognized with respect to the recent frequency of certain weather events, extreme weather events, rainfall in particular, traditional methods of preparing their land, farmers, because of the fact that in the dry season the issue is a lack of water for irrigation, and therefore they would dam their drains and prepare their areas to kind of catch water for the dry season. Many farmers in the rainy season now need to do the reverse. They need to ensure that their drains are properly cleaned, but also in addition to their land preparation, do they plant on raised beds now as opposed to being planted flat traditionally? How does their land preparation, etc.? How do they design their farm based on the experiences and their topography, etc.? So these are things that we're working with farmers to help them in terms of awareness. We partnered with the FAO, and the FAO provided a number of awareness and sensitization programs with farmers in different counties with respect to building resilience to climate change and the effects of climate change. Extreme flooding and drainage and those issues was a key factor. And again, the incidence of pests and disease, they normally increase with increased rainfall. So how they do their cultural practices, weed control, timing of planting, whether you plant disease-resistant varieties as opposed to varieties that may be more susceptible to pests and disease, how do we approach our pest and disease. These are all part and parcel of us and the programs that we have in training farmers and in making them more aware and sensitizing them.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. In terms of perennial larceny that has been highlighted a lot in the media recently, our present squad is seriously depleted in terms of human resource. Currently, we're in a recruitment drive. We aim to be completed at least by August into September, where we would have a full squad, a complement of just over 100 persons, from inspectors, corporals, constable. And we are hoping positively that that will, of course, impact and help mitigate all these issues and reduce the issues of perennial larceny. And of course, the Asian farming population, a lot of our registered farmers are probably beyond the age of 60 or even older. So we are trying to encourage the youth into agriculture. And in doing that, there is a youth incentive program where we collaborate with the Ministry of Youth Affairs to be able to encourage the youths. And there has been a lot of positives in that program. Thank you, Member.
So, Madam Chair, my final question is, could you say, Deputy PS, that agriculture is ready and able to assist in us achieving our goal by 2030?
As of any ministry member, we have our challenges. And all my colleagues, you all will identify with the challenges of human resource in terms of our staffing, and of course in terms of funding, because currently we have some PSIP projects, and some in terms of releases, we don't get sufficient funds to complete our projects. But I must say the staff of the ministry, despite all these challenges, we have some really hardworking, we have some people with a lot of passion for agriculture and what they do. So in terms of us reaching our goal, we may not reach it by 2030, but at least we will be on target, maybe for a bit further than 2030, and of course with the collaboration with other ministries that will assist us. Okay.
So PS, is there an option to not meet the target by 2030? I was going to ask what steps you're going to take to realign yourself to get there by 2030.
Well, realistically speaking, Madam Chair, I'm not sure if we could commit to 2030. Especially with all these unprecedented issues with climate change, etc. Of course, that would be a factor in us meeting our deadline for 2030.
Okay, thank you very much. Member Diorain.
Thank you, Chair. I have a follow-up question to the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Trade. First, let me ask the Ministry of Trade, what is the Ministry of Trade's target to reduce the food import bill? So I know very much the ambitious report by the Roadmap to Recovery Committee's report, which in Pillar 2 focus on making food security a reality in Trinidad and Tobago, and there are several initiatives under there. And in the Ministry of Trade submission, you all also submitted several initiatives that you all are engaging in. And also, I'm sure you all are collaborating with the Ministry of Agriculture to, help them increase the amount of food being produced. So my question first is, what is the target to reduce the food import bill? I think it's above $4 billion right now. And also the second thing is, who exactly is measuring the quantity of food being produced and how much more we need to produce to reach to a point where we could say we at least close to being self-sufficient? Because, and I'm asking I first want to hear from the Ministry of Trade, because I know in the Ministry of Trade submission, you all emphasize the policy towards import substitution, right? So I would like to hear some insights on that, please.
Thank you, Member. Through you, Chair. With respect to decreasing the food import bill, there is the recently launched CARICOM initiative, which speaks to decreasing the regional food import bill
of the CARICOM member states by 25% by the year 2025. So having said that, the Ministry of Trade would have partnered significantly last year with the Ministry of Agriculture with respect to the Agri-Investment Forum that was hosted in August in 2022. Now, this initiative is engaging the attention of member states in various areas through the COTED, the Council for Trade and Economic Development. And there are several sectoral working groups that are looking at reviewing the common external tariff, as well as regional studies on identified agricultural products. And these would more or less be the remit of the Ministry of Agriculture. Trinidad and Tobago also partners with its CARICOM partners with at special meetings of the Coated of Agriculture, as several other initiatives in support of the agricultural sector, and the Ministry of Agriculture again leads the discussions. Now, with respect to some of the specific initiatives that you referenced, I think my colleague would have mentioned the International Certification Fund, which seeks to provide fish and fish processors, agricultural processors, agro-processors, with grant funding to allow them to become certified to export. And the thrust of this is both for export, to increase our ability to be able to export, to be certified to export, as well as import substitution. So if those producers, agro producers, can be certified to produce products that we no longer need to import, that is a thrust towards import certification. And I think, as my colleague would have mentioned, approximately 50% of the beneficiaries thus far of that certification fund have been from the agriculture sector and the food and beverage sector. There's also I think they would have mentioned the grant funding with respect to supplies and equipment, and I think the grant funding is up to $250,000 per recipient to be able to invest in equipment and tooling and retooling to be able to do agro-processing. So I think those are two of the main areas for the Ministry of Trade. But with respect to the target, it is 25% by 2025 to reduce the food import bill.
And that is within the region or in Trinidad and Tobago alone?
So it is all CARICOM member states. That's the goal, 25% by 2025. So Trinidad and Tobago, that would be our target.
Okay, and thank you, PS. Through you, Madam Chair, Ministry of Agriculture, in collaborating with the Ministry of Trade, do you see this target being an achievable target based on the challenges that you would have alluded to? Because predial larceny is a serious challenge. Also, what is a serious challenge is that the age of farmers who are engaged in farming, and also the rate at which farmers are becoming discouraged to produce because of the predial larceny problem. So based on those three challenges alone, do you see this target of reducing the food import bill by 25%, collaborating with the Ministry of Trade, do you see it being feasible?
Remember, despite all the challenges that we spoke of, the Ministry of Agriculture has initiated certain collaboration with, as we said before, Guyana in terms of the rice industry, which would help us achieve the 25 by 25. I'll let our technical advisor share some additional information.
Thank you, DPS. So, member, with respect to that overarching CARICOM initiative of reducing imports into the region by 25%, Trinidad and Tobago, through the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Trade, would have identified areas where we are actually looking to target that 25% and achieve that 25% goal by 2025. And therefore, we are aggressively pursuing increased production of certain commodities locally, which will help us achieve that 25%. In addition to that, we have now looked at certain programs that we would like to initiate locally, identifying certain key commodities of focus, where we would be setting particular targets, annual targets between now and 2025, to actually increase production, what is required to increase production in terms of infrastructure, the human resource required to support the farmers, marketing opportunities, just along the chain. And we've identified those areas, and we are working assiduously to achieving that.
Thank you. A follow-up question. So based on what I'm understanding is that a lot of incentives and encouragement is going towards providing farmers and agro-processors with the input, so the machinery and equipment that they need to produce. Are you all engaging in any sort of targets to measure that they are producing and the amount by which they are increasing production over a period of time?
Okay, through our agency, NAMDEFCO, the National Agricultural Marketing and Development Company, most of the local produce is sold through the NAMDEFCO markets, either the wholesale markets or the retail markets. In addition to that, a lot of farmers actually are registered with NAMDEFCO, and they have field officers who they will go out and monitor farmers' production. And NAMDEFCO has a very robust database with respect to production, and therefore we are able to monitor and evaluate in terms of the output from these local farmers.
So then have food production locally been increasing?
Yes, this is generally speaking, yes, especially over the last 2 to 3 years during the pandemic. I think there has been a focus on increasing local production to meet demands, and we participated in supporting the Ministry of Social Development with those hampers and food baskets, etc. And so that has actually catalyzed a lot of agricultural production. Despite the issues with flooding, etc., I think there has been a number of areas where farmers have actually increased production.
So, through you, Chair, despite food production having increased over the last couple of years, or let's say 3 years, we still see an increase in the food production and the food import bill, generally because of global increases in food prices. So, I mean, how are we managing a situation like that? I don't know if the Ministry of Trade would want to say something.
Through you, Chair. We can agree that there would have been increases in food prices over the past 2 to 3 years, and this would have been largely due to some of the issues that my colleague from the Ministry of Agriculture would have mentioned, which would have been adverse weather conditions in major producing countries, COVID-19 restrictions, as well as shipping and logistics disruptions, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as well as some of the protectionist strategies being employed by many countries as they responded to the Russia-Ukraine war. But what we have noticed, so as a result, as we are net food importer, prices would have reflected, there would have been increases in prices due to those market conditions. What the Ministry of Trade would have attempted to do, besides the monitoring that we always do to be able to have an idea in terms of the trending of food prices, would have been to do the things that would have been within the remit of the Ministry of Trade, and one of them was to propose the zero rating of a number of items with respect to value-added tax. So there was a list of basic items that would have been subjected to zero VAT, 0% VAT, and the Ministry would have proposed in late 2021 to increase that list to include a number of other items that would have been zero rated with respect to VAT. And some of these items that would have been suggested would have been some of your oils, some of the healthier oils, the olive oil, canola oil, some of the other basic things that families would use, such as oats, orange juice, apple juice, and some of these would have been some of the items. Additionally, the Ministry, because the Ministry of Trade participates in the Council of Trade and Economic Development, a subset of CARICOM, we would have recommended the reduction of the common external tariff on a number of basic food items. And this is something that we do every year. We review it, we consult with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture, and we seek to get those items, if not 5%, at least zero rated in terms of when they're imported. There is no CET, or as we call it, common external tariff on those items. And in 2022, we would have gone back and had the CET assessed on 19 essential food items to remove that. As we also, as well, I mean, it's not really food related, but in terms we also look at a number of pharmaceutical items as well to reduce the cost to consumers, approximately 3,000 pharmaceutical items every year. The Ministry would seek to have the CET reduced on those. So I think those are some of the basic positions that we
Chair,
take.
just one more question to the Ministry of Trade. Are you able to say that with these initiatives, were you able to at least achieve a declining trend in the volume of food imports as opposed to the value? So because of the global pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war and the surge in food inflation around the world, generally the price of food would have increased and our food import bill would have increased as well. My question is, even though, just to take into consideration the inflationary impact, remove that inflationary impact, did the volume of goods, food imported into the country decrease? I'm just trying to understand if we are at least achieving partially some of our objectives, while the Ministry of Agriculture is increasing food production, that the Ministry of Trade is achieving a decline in food imports.
Chair, through you, I can say generally in some areas there would have been, but to be specific, we'd have to provide that information.
I'll appreciate that information in writing through you, Chair. Thank you.
Ask the Ministry of Agriculture. You had indicated that you don't collect data on the average income of fisher folk, of women in farming, and some other groups, and I'm wondering why family farmers.
Chair, I think when I asked that question to my colleagues, the field officers, I think when they said the farmers, they really don't like to disclose that sort of information. I'm not sure if they think that we are using it, against them, but it's a very difficult. The information is very difficult to gather.
Okay, but isn't there any other way? Because what I'm looking at, and I'm asking that question in the context of sustainable agriculture, and the 5 principles, and one of the principles being to improve livelihoods and foster inclusive economic growth. So that I would figure that income is one of the measures of that. So how then do we look at the principles of sustainable agriculture if we don't have, or we're not collecting data?
I agree it's important, but maybe one suggestion that maybe we could look at to consider is that in terms of offering an incentive grant, so you would have to disclose your income. So based on your income and means test, then you would be allowed to access the grant. So maybe that's some way of collecting that data.
Okay, and I also wanted to find out from the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of 2 things. One, in talking about your resilient agricultural practices, and you indicated to us about 80% of your registered farmers practice, the resilient agricultural methods. I want to find out in terms of what, if any, initiatives or methods you are utilizing or in the process of designing to see how you improve on that 80% figure.
Through your chair, could I ask our technical advisor to share some information?
One of the things that's, with respect to persons utilizing and adopting technology that is recommended would be in terms of showing them the example of those who are utilizing those technologies. And there is a methodology called farmer field schools, where farmers we encouraged to actually visit other farmers' fields, organized and coordinated, and therefore they can talk to the farmers and see the results of them utilizing that particular technology. So our extension, training, and information division, they are actually involved in that sort of activity, working with farmers and working within the different counties to encourage them with respect to the uptake. As it is with most technologies, you have the early adopters, people who will jump on it early, then those who will wait and see, And then there are others who may have certain challenges in adopting it, and it's for us to be able to identify what is a specific challenge that they may have, and then try to see how we could work with them to be able to overcome whatever their particular challenge may be in adopting the technology.
Yeah. But in terms of, thanks, Mr. Grimes, in terms of targeting, okay, you reach 80%. Do you then have some sort of plan to say, okay, by 2025, I should reach 82% and going about it in that sort of systematic way? Is that done or under consideration at all?
Yes, because I think annually we review our activities and review the impact of the activities. And while it may not be articulated directly, I think inadvertently the objective really is to get 100% of the farmers actually utilizing new technologies, climate resilient technologies, because it's affecting all farmers. And therefore, we probably prefer farmers adopt the resilient technologies as opposed to being impacted negatively by these extreme weather events when you have to pay reliefs and stuff like that. So.
Okay, thank you. And then what we're being told here is that 65% of lands designated for agricultural use are currently under production, meaning in production. Yes? Okay, fine. So what happens with the 35%? Is that lost to building, construction? Is it that it's just lands that are lying fallow? What is the position with respect to that?
Chair, a number of reasons. For example, there are lands that may have now been encroached by commercial activities, or the agricultural lands that were designated for agriculture, being utilized for other activities, whether it be housing and stuff like that. There are lands that may have been denuded based on practices of farmers, and therefore there are industries that may have been in decline over a number of years. So the rice example is a classic example. Rice is a large-scale mechanized activity, and therefore one farmer may have 300 acres, 400 acres under rice production. Over the years, there's been a decline since around 2015, 16, but there's a revitalization thrust towards rice. So therefore, we will see by, say, 2025, about 5,000 acres involved in rice production again. Currently, it's about 800 acres. So there's a program to actually bring these lands that are idle and lying idle back into production. So for different reasons, lands may not or may be underutilized or not fully utilized or unutilized totally. So the example of rice is an example of large acreages not being utilized that we intend to target to bring those lands back in production.
And would it be rice or other diversified crops?
Yes, other commodities also.
Okay.
You know, so.
All right. And could you tell us a little more? I don't know if it's you or the PS or your other colleague about this, the rebates for the GAP and the IPM, environmental practices. I'm talking about specifically renewable energy.
Yeah, but that response, I believe, it's related to the Board of Inland Revenue, the incentive that they give in terms of investing in solar energy.
Okay.
So
that's annually?
Agriculture.
It's not really agriculture?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So,
maybe
all right.
we should have been a bit clearer in our response.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And okay, I'll allow Member Hislop to come in while I find the question I wanted to ask Ministry of Agriculture.
Yeah, I want to treat very quickly with fisheries. A good meal should involve a nice piece of fish, right? Yeah. What is the situation with our fish stock? How do we treat with that? Do we have annual surveys? Do we have a situation with overfishing? Do we also have a challenge with the size of catch? Should there be a regulation of the size of catch that you bring to the boat, because sometimes these guys catch everything once it bites the hook, right? How do we treat with that so that we have a sustainable fishing industry? Because if we catch out all the fish now, down the road with all the industrialization and all that's happening in the sea, then we're going to have a challenge. So do we have a way, a mechanism to keep track of our fish stock? Are we looking at fish seasons? Is there a penalty if a fisherman brings in a fish that is not of a required size? How are we looking to treat those things?
Okay, so yes, to some extent I will answer your question. You know, we are a country that is based on oil and gas, and you know, historically we've not recognized to a large extent the importance of fishing, and of course sustainability and food security. Sustainability of resources, fish resources, equates to food security, because sustainability inherent in its definition means fish for future generations, and therefore you're required to put in place the systems to ensure that fish is maintained for future generations, for your kids and my grandkids, and that is also inherent in the need for food security. We do collect some data. We have data collectors at landing sites that collect data from the fishers, and we do produce annual production figures for Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, our current legislation is 1916. It is the oldest in the world, and it severely limits us in terms of administering the type of management measures that we need to put in place to rein in sometimes some unsustainable practices. We are currently before a joint select committee of Parliament, and we are moving very quickly along with this bill, because internationally we're recognizing that we need to play catch up. And in that regard, we are coming with new legislation, which we hope will be passed. It is radical legislation, moving from 1916 to current. So it is a mindset change with respect to fishers and how people operate. But we hope that we will be able to have that basis for enacting some of the management measures that are required in order to ensure that we have food security and sustainability of fisheries resources for every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, because the resource belongs to all of us, and we have a responsibility to ensure that it is maintained for this generation and for future generations.
Madam Chair, just a follow-up. We know that the legislation is before Joint Select Committee, and you say radical legislation. Have we started any significant education drive with our fishermen? Because we know if we come with radical legislation from 1916 to 2023, I am accustomed doing things a particular way, and I have benefited from that particular way from 1916 to now. So how is this new legislation going to help me as a fisherman? And also, what incentives are there in place for a young person to see fishing as a viable way as a viable career?
I noticed. So, as you said, it will require some change in mindset. This is a change process, a change management process. Fishers, legitimate fishers, and you have to understand that there are activities involved in the fishing industries that may be legitimate or illegitimate, right? But legitimate fishers will tell you that they spend more money going out to fish, that they have to buy bigger engines, they have to go further out to sea, and therefore, without even, and we do have some stock assessments done, a bit dated, but even from a practical perspective, fishermen themselves will tell you the stocks are declining. They have to spend more in terms of inputs in order to catch the same or less fish. And I think that impact on their livelihood, that manifestation of that loss of income, the legitimate fishers are beginning to see the need for controlling, because when we say radical, we mean regulating. In the past, we have had an open access fishery. Persons are free to fish at any time, anyway. There we are not accustomed as a people to applying for a permit, to reporting our catches. We may go to the US or we may go to the States and buy a permit and go out and fish and understand you need to do it in the US. But in Trinidad, there's not that mindset that we need to understand that change in shift, that shift in perception and that change in culture. And it like, I get your point that it will take some work. We have been trying, and it is a process.
Just finally, Madam Chair, but I think within this period where the legislation is in the GSE, I think this is an ideal time for the ministry to really ramp up its education drive with the fishermen about what the new legislation is going to bring to the industry, so that by the time it gets into the debate, that we don't have a situation where the fishermen are striking, are protesting because this bill is going to kill my livelihood. Now is the time to have us sit down with them, so that by the time it gets into the parliament and all the acting happens, that the fishermen are not out there as well protesting.
Yes, I understand your position. If I may, Chair, yes, we acknowledge that we do have an extension and training unit, and we do interact with fishing associations, and we have been trying for a very long time in the absence of legislation to create an understanding of the need to, take fish of a certain size, ensure that buried lobsters are not taken, So I think there is a movement towards that trend. However, we are a little bit catch-22 situation because we are in a legislative process, and the outcome of the bill, we cannot go into specific details, but certainly the intent of the bill we can, and we have been trying to discuss with fishers and get them to buy in. I'm not saying it's an easy process at all, by any means.
Okay, so I still, thank you so much, Ms. Lucky. I hear your passion about the fisheries. So I just want to ask this, in terms of, this is the Ministry of Agriculture. You had said to us that you provide soil testing to farmers with guidance and recommendation for maintaining soil. And it seems that you do a lot of outreach to farmers, training and that kind of thing. And you may not be able to give us the answers now, but if we could get it in writing to see what kind of reach. So within last year, how many farmers would have accessed your services, so that we get an idea of impact. Okay, so that.
Okay, Chair, we'll provide that.
Yes.
Later.
Right, thank you. And the other thing I wanted to find out is about the Green Fund, because you had spoken about the Green Climate Fund, and I wanted to get an idea of how much funding was received to improve the monitoring system for climate change impacts on the agricultural sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And you have identified some activities, so how much funding overall, and a breakdown in terms of the spend on each activity.
Chair, could I provide that information at a later date?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. All right, so I see I still have member Maurice Julian.
Madam Chair, I looked at challenges faced by the Ministry of Health, because while I know that, for example, in schools there is no soft drink allowed, no junk food, but in particular with the maternity clinics, you can still obtain all these very lovely items that I miss so very much. Can you tell us, when there's a reluctance from adolescent girls, pregnant, lactating women, and older persons to address their nutritional needs, what is the process? What is the Ministry of Health doing for this in particular? Because I think we all agree that proper nutrition should start from the womb.
Did you ask this? No? Okay.
Unfortunately, as was said before, our chief nutritionist, who was supposed to be here, was unable to be here. But I could provide that information for you in terms of what specifically the ministry does.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, could we also get in writing the factors that cause malnutrition and underweight, overweight, obese, as well as information on the different clinics that are available, as well as, Madam Chair, our through you, the social media outreach in particular for these groups, the communication aspect, right? Because I know, Madam Chair, we would have seen the Minister of Health being very active in these various things. But what else is there for the public to know and to follow? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Member Durine.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a last bit of questions. To the Ministry of Agriculture, you all spoke about the rebates and the soil testing services that you all provide to farmers. Having several farmers in my family, one thing that I've noticed is that it takes a long time to get rebates and also to get back the results of the soil testing. Sometimes it takes two to 3 months, sometimes even more. Is there anything that is being done to have these rebates refunded at a faster pace, and also to have the turnaround time for the results for the soil testing to be a shorter space of time?
Okay, remember, in terms of the rebates, sometimes in terms of the verification process, if the farmer is qualified to receive whatever grant he is applying for, sometimes that takes a process, because as I said before, in terms of our staffing, agriculture and the farms is a widespread area sometimes that they have to visit. So sometimes that is one of the reasons. And also in terms of the processing, and I was speaking earlier about digitalization, where we digitalize the process in terms of applying for these grants and also processing the grants. So in terms of verifying every year that you are a farmer and you still produce this amount of produce every year, that information will already have been captured. So even every year you won't have to be asking for the same information. So hopefully that will help in terms of speeding up the processes. But we are trying in terms of meeting the farmers' requirement, because they need the incentive, we know that, especially when they incur losses.
Thank you. And I asked this question because I remember that you said earlier that you have a specific youth encouragement farming program. And from what I understand, my experience, the youth who get involved in farming, they usually rely on these rebates, right? And sometimes when you're young and you enter into farming, you have to deal with predial larceny, you have to deal with pests, the locust problem, you have the giant African snail, and then you use your money out of pocket to get these equipment that you need, and then it takes like 6 months. Yes, that in itself serves as a disincentive for the youth to get involved in farming. So my question is, since the launch or the start of this initiative, the Youth Incentive Encouragement Program, how many youth have you all been able to get into agriculture and stay in agriculture?
Okay. Remember, I don't have that information right now, so I can provide that, because we will have to liaise with the Ministry of Youth Affairs, because it's a collaborative program.
And my last set of questions is with respect to Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Now, I know you all alluded to the fact that the value of the food support program is approximately 250 to 300 million on an annual basis. My question is, over the past couple of years, the number of persons accessing food support, how has it changed? And like those persons, how many persons, I'm trying to get an understanding of how many persons have remained on food support and how many persons have graduated out of food support.
Chair, through you, the ministry would like to provide that data in writing.
Sure, thank you so much. And could you provide it on an annual basis? Annual basis, the number of persons receiving, the number of persons who remain, and of course, the number of new persons who are added onto the program on an annual basis from 2019 to present. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so thank you very much. I just want to ask a question to the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs. In terms of this, if you could give us an idea of how much money is allocated annually, specifically for the acquisition of food and specialized medical supplies to the upkeep and maintenance of children in community residences. So if you could give us an idea of how much is allocated for that and like the spend on that, let's say for last fiscal.
Chair, Mr. Caesar will provide the answer to that.
Yes?
Chair, we would like to get back to you on that. I don't have that data with me at present.
Okay, Mr. Caesar, I want attempt to get you in the conversation.
That's no problem. I'm here.
But thank you, we'll get that in writing. Okay, and I just want to ask some questions to the PS Ministry of Trade and Industry, and it ties into agriculture. And even if it's that we get this in writing, but what we could answer, if we could get the answers to it. So, one, I've seen that the Ministry of Trade and Industry have established certain good agricultural practices, good manufacturing practices, water reuse. And I want to know, I see they are voluntary standards, and I want to ask why aren't they mandatory standards, and therefore what is the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries doing to ensure that these standards are adopted and become mainstreamed in agriculture?
Chair, I'd allow my colleague, Director Policy, to respond.
Yes, please. We may have to talk about it because I may have the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries in a vacuum.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as you're aware, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards is an agency of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and therefore the TTBS is actively developing standards in the agricultural sector and other sectors of relevance to what we are developing. And so all of the standards that we develop in the initial stages are voluntary standards, once it's not mandated by legislation to become mandatory. And so based on demand, based on the stakeholders of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, based on our focus on agro-processing and our focus on food and beverage sector, this is why we have developed standards in good agricultural practices, good manufacturing practices, wastewater reuse, cocoa beans, cocoa sampling, cocoa specifications, and we are also in the process of developing standards in hot peppers, pineapples, pumpkins, dasheen leaves, and melangine. Now, when we develop standards, we have a standards committee that is used to develop these standards, and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries would be a key stakeholder in the development of the standards. So they are aware that the standard is being developed, they are involved in the process, and the other stakeholders involved, depending on the topic, are part of this committee as well. Yeah. So they are initially voluntary, and of course, as you directed to the Ministry of Agriculture, it is when we put it into legislation or we want to make these now mandatory standards, then we can go through that process.
Okay, but why I'm asking, legislation is one thing, we know it's slow, and that might be saying something about us, but I don't mean it that way. We know it's slow. But, you know, I am wondering, why can't we try to get more buy-in? Okay, public education. And it happens in everything. Gates falling and killing children. Yes. But you all have standards on gates long, but I'm not going down that road. All right, but that's just one of the extremes. What is the education process, the public awareness process, which to me could be a collaboration between you all and the Ministry of Agriculture?
Of course, and I think the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards has recognized, because of how technical standards are and understanding the standards, they have advanced in terms of an awareness program through a particular project. We are looking at different ways to bring awareness, not only just through the media and print, but through workshops and sessions and focus groups and target groups, etc. One of the discussions that we had was a national dialogue with the Ministry of Agriculture. So the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the TTBS, that's one of the dialogues that we've had. And it's through this dialogue that we establish what are the areas that need to develop standards. So I agree that we need to do more promotion, we need to do more collaboration, but we have started and we have recognized the need for more awareness, and we have started putting programs in place to push that.
Okay, so PS, Bureau of Standards, their budget for publicity and promotions and so is controlled by you, or they have that as their own line item?
They would have it as their own line item.
Okay, so it means that that is totally under your control Bureau's standards. I was trying to get a little protection for you, but you're on your own with that. Okay, all right, so let me ask, PS, I don't know if this is you. I'd seen under the implementation of the National Quality Policy, again, this is Bureau Standards, this is the value chain study, where there's a feasibility study for the cocoa industry. And I mean, these submissions were done a little while ago, right? What is the current status of that feasibility study?
So in terms of the value chain study, it's called a Calidana study. And what it is, it's looking at different aspects of the value chain and introducing service standards or processing standards throughout the value chain. And so in terms of this study, the cocoa industry was identified as one of the priority sectors, and there was a number of stakeholder sessions with the Cocoa Research Development Company, and a feasibility study is still currently being finalized. So that's where we are. So in terms of that being completed, then we will move on to the other step of actual implementation once feasible.
So how close are you to finalization? Because this is about, this submission should be about 4 months old? Yeah.
Within this fiscal, we would finalize, and then, of course, moving into the next fiscal, we would move the project forward with the appropriate funds.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to find out about the study to identify the value chains between the non-energy sectors and the increase in non-energy exports.
So we have two studies. We have a sectoral linkages study and a regional value chain study. These studies came about during COVID. We recognized, because of the difficulties to access supplies and inputs internationally and the delays that came about, there's a need to build the capacity domestically as well as regionally. And so domestically, with the sectoral linkages study, looks at particular sectors between the agricultural sector and the manufacturing sector and the retail sector, and being able to make those linkages for our manufacturers and exporters. Now, it also links back to the International Certification Fund that we are also providing the support to certify particular agro-processors. So from the agriculture sector, you identify your primary products. It comes now into the manufacturing sector, where we make that link in terms of which agro-processors you can link to. We help through the different grants and certification funds to certify, and then we link you to the retail sector and then the export sector. So domestically. And then, of course, we want to look at nearshoring and your regional partners and how we can establish regional value chains where we can source inputs throughout the region, as they mentioned with Guyana. One of the MOUs that we have is with Guyana in terms of inputs into the agricultural sector as well as into the agro-processing sector. So the outputs are a creation of a sectoral map to show what the sectoral linkages are and a list of recommendations in terms of how we move this forward. This is currently being done, and this sectoral linkages project will be finished in the end of August, by the end of August. Once we have the recommendations, then we move forward to implement. In terms of the regional value chain, the consultant is also completing this study, and this will be done in July. And once this is done, again, we will look to implement the recommendations.
It all sounds very exciting. Let me just ask you something that's off the How is this financed? Is this some grant from
Okay, so
international partner?
There are two sets of financing. So in terms of the regional value chain, it's financed by a grant by the Technical Cooperation through the Inter-American Development Bank. And then the other study, which is the sectoral linkages, is financed through the PSIP.
Okay. And this might be a little off guard too. If you could answer, you could answer. How do we ensure transparency and accountability? Because these are off-budget source of funds, right? Financing. This is off-budget. This is not coming from consolidated fund and so on. How do we ensure transparency and accountability in the use of these funds, value for money? Who monitors that?
Okay, so the first one, the sectoral linkages, is a PSIP fund.
Right.
And so therefore, in terms of PSIP funding, we have the consultant, we did the right procurement process in line with procurement regulations, and we do monitor deliverables, and of course it goes to the permanent secretary for approval, and it's approved in terms of the deliverable meeting our targets, and then we distribute the funds. In terms of the Inter-American Development Bank, we follow the same process. It does not differ from the PSIP funds. We follow the same process in terms of the output and deliverable must adhere to what we want based on our TOR, based on our discussions, our stakeholder sessions. It's then approved internally, and then we inform via non-objection to the Inter-American Development Bank that it's okay and we are satisfied with the deliverable before they can make the necessary payment. So,
thank you very much. And the last thing I wanted to find out is, again, about this Moruga Agro Processing and Light Industrial Park. And there's a statement that says the park has contributed to the strengthening of the agriculture sector's value chain through increased investment and enhanced linkages. That's a conclusion. Okay, what can you tell me that I can also share that conclusion? Okay, because I see the park is not completely rented out. Okay, so how do I come to that conclusion?
Thank you for that question, Chair. Now, the focus of this agro-processing park is to be able to support the production of value-added exportable products, utilizing inputs from our agricultural sector. And what we would envision is that this park is going to strengthen the agricultural value chain through increased investments and as well as the enhanced linkages, which both my colleague would have mentioned previously. If I were to, the facility is going to really encourage increased production, both for export as well as for local consumption, as well as supplying the local market. It is true that the park isn't fully occupied right now. There are 6 lots available out of the 12 lots that would have been developed. 6 lots comprise factory-built shells, of which 5 of the shells have been occupied, and there's 1 available. And out of the land lots, out of the 6 land lots, 4 have been utilized, and there are approximately, 6 lots available? Yeah, 2 lots available, sorry. And to promote the park, we have InvestTT, which is one of the agencies, the Investment Promotion Agency under the Ministry of Trade, is aggressively promoting the park. And there are 2 proposed activities. One is Movements at Moruga campaign, and another is the Moruga Accelerator Program, which is going to be launched in the next few months to promote the benefits of this agro-processing facility and to encourage tenanting of said park.
Okay, so the statement that I have read as a conclusion, a fait accompli, is really a statement of intent. So I've misread it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So you will in time show us the realization of the intent.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. And last thing I want to ask, I think this is my second last, but I wanted to find out, and this may be the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, where you're talking about in fiscal 2022, payments in the sum of $18.7 million were made under your agriculture incentive programs. Okay, and you've said, well, this comes from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, but I guess you are the source of the information, right? So you've said your various agricultural incentives, and you've listed them out there, from vehicle for agriculture, fisheries, machinery and equipment, right down to agro-processing. Could we get a breakdown of how this $18.7 million has been allocated among these various grants?
Chair, this information will be provided to you in writing.
Okay, and Member Hislop, I think you wish to engage the...
This is my final question. Final question. I'm going to jump to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. How many persons and households are permanently and temporarily on the food support program? I don't know if that is a question Member Duran asked. So, okay, fine. So I think we good. Because that information was already given, right? In writing? Right, good. So,
Member Morris. Okay. All right, so if there are no further questions, I want to at this stage bring the public hearing to a close. There are certain questions we still have, and the committee the Secretariat will write to you all for all the commitments, the assurances, to remind you all and give you a certain deadline. But I want to really thank the representatives of all the various ministries: Planning and Development, Health, Agriculture, Social Development and Family Services, Office of the OPM, Ministry of Trade and Industry. I want to thank you all for a very, very enlightening discussion on a very important area. We know the importance of the SDGs, and Madam PS, I assure you, we are going to make all those 17 goals by 2023. As the PS Planning and Development says, a lot is happening. We just don't have the empirical evidence that we're meeting the target, and she's confident in the 6 years. So we'll all be whipped into shape. But I thank you all for your cooperation, your participation. I want to thank the members of the listening public and the members of the media who've remained with us. I wish you all a pleasant journey home. Good afternoon. Good evening. It's late evening.